Welcome to a special edition of BeelerCast. The planets have aligned for Nils Lind and I to be in the same room at the same time. So we thought we'd actually do a conversation that we've been meaning to have for quite some time. I think both of us are so busy, we're rarely able to actually ever catch up. And so why don't we put it on tape? Why don't we record this and get a conversation going? So I'm so glad that you're here in New York. And let's do this. Why don't we start at the beginning? And my goal here would be I'd love to learn more about you. I've known you for many years, but I don't know a lot about you, other than the work that you do. Then we could talk about Assertive Yield. We could talk about where we're going with publishing and the future of things. So, Nils, I don't know where to start with your childhood, but I know one thing about you is that you love gaming.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Rob, for having me. It is true that initially I kind of my early kind of work experience started in the gaming industry. But it actually takes us one step further back, is that while I was at school, I never really liked school at all. So for me, it was kind of I really hated it. And I was lucky in the end that I was able to only attend school 2 days out of 5 a week, and could do my freelance work stuff on the side. So I was basically working on websites and other things for companies, organizations, and so on. And at some point, my small brother started to play Minecraft and basically pulled me in a bit because he was building very basically extensive things. He's also very, I would say, analytical and engineering focused. So he would build big machines and things, and they would end up that this entire server where all the people would come together to play in that world, that the setups he was building would result in that entire world basically lagging. So meaning it would not be able to keep up with all of the machines running there.
That's it. Well, in Minecraft, I've got kids who, and again, it's amazing to go and they've created this 8-bit universe with all the technology we have, and yet at the same time, because that kind of brings people together. No, where was this? Where did you grow up?
So this was all happening in Germany. So I grew up around Munich, not in the city, but outside of it. And my brother really kind of put me into this game, but more from a perspective of, hey, I want to make sure that he has a safe playing environment and that he can basically really build out all of his machines and so on. So I was pulled into that, and step over step, basically tried to find him a new system, but it had the same issues, everything. The entire system would not be able to keep up with basically amount of stuff you could build in Minecraft, because it can go really complex. So it ended up that step by step, we got more and more control over the system and took it over. And it was quite interesting for me as a concept itself, because on one side you have community management within it, as you are playing with many different people in there. On the other side, it's something that is very technical. So while I was doing my freelance stuff with web development and so on, it had some overlap. Of course, it's a different story and different strategy and so on. But as we took it over, while I was still going to school, and we added a bit more professionalism to this kind of Minecraft server and so on, it grew and grew and grew. And at some point I got to the stage where I was about to basically finish school. And of course my parents wanted me to go study. I did apply and I did stuff and so on, but I never really wanted to go study. It was not sitting right with me. What I wanted to do was I wanted to see how much bigger can I make this. Because at that point in time, it was bringing in around $500 in donations, which is not a lot, but can buy groceries for that. So
right.
It's something for a school kid.
Yeah.
And luckily, at some point, I was able to convince my parents to give me at least 1 year to try it. And I think this was really the interception point for me to go into the entrepreneurial direction, because within that 1 year and the following years, we were able to grow that very, very small thing into one of the world's biggest networks. At some point, we became the world's biggest network for modern Minecraft. And all of this basically was possible due to a really nice community we were building that was family friendly, very welcoming and so on. So people that would come to us, they would stay engaged. They really enjoyed being there. And at the same time, I would also be open to spend some money to help basically keep that community running. And we didn't do any pay-to-win stuff or so as we have in all of the mobile games. They were just they were happy to contribute.
That's amazing. So, I mean, so one of the things that I would say that I would love to find out across the community is how many people kind of started the way that you did. Like, and again, I want to talk about your transition into ad tech, but I will share that I was really good with computers, and it was all about creating games and trying that out. And you hit a wall. How do you get through that wall? And you figure that out, and you figure that out, and you start to build up that ability to do that. So again, it sounds like, right, you kind of got a passion for a particular game and then just kept building on it. And I'm sure it brought on new problems and then new opportunities, right? And that's the part where, again, if you start to go, I like that piece of it, you get kind of addicted to it, right? Of going like, throw me another challenge. Sometimes it'd be less challenges, but more opportunities, right? Of just being able to kind of to work through those things. So here you are, you've got this large network, the largest at one point, right? That's amazing. And you have to tell, just like everyone else, how does that transition toward ad tech? How did you get involved?
So the transition was not really like direct. Pretty much like from running this online community, this kind of Minecraft network at this point, which was very technical, lots of servers, lots of people, like we had over 1 million players over the years. And really like the transition happened as it was starting to make money. But I didn't have many expenses. So what I did was I really like having these communities. So I started to invest in basically buying and acquiring online communities, not within the game space specifically, but like websites that are kind of similar to like a Reddit, user-generated content, but under the hood, it is a community.
Right.
So replicating what we did there within the Minecraft network, but going back to more like the web development side of it. So within that, we grew and grew as well. And this was primarily on the German market. And on the German market, even today, a lot of things are being sold directly.
Right.
There is not as much programmatic. Of course, there's a lot of programmatic, but to this day, it might be the market that has like one of the highest still like direct sold, even on smaller domains and smaller traffic, with lots of sales houses and so on that manage that. And we were working with one of these big companies in the market that was driving us really good revenue from having access to these direct campaigns. But at some point, they got acquired. And they decided, we don't want you anymore. Like, we don't want all of these, basically. That is not our owned and operated anymore. So they closed the doors, and this was like the day where, for us, revenue-wise, we tanked down to 1/5 of what we used to do. Just because one company got acquired and decided, no, we don't want to share this direct advertising business anymore.
Interesting. Okay.
This was also around the time when header bidding got like a little more attention. It was still very, very early days. And so what we basically did, like in the beginning, is of course, okay, we have to put more advertisements on those pages because otherwise it's not sustainable. But the moment we did, having communities, what happens? They revolt. So it really got that bad in some of these communities that we had to shut them down because there was no activity anymore. So they really didn't like, of course, the increase of advertisements, but at the same time, we had to do something to keep those running after this huge decrease in revenue from one day to the next one. And this then got to the point where we said, okay, we have to figure out a way to make money. Of course, we can bring in and work with others to get direct advertiser spend back in, but it was not as lucrative as with the one we had that basically was acquired. So with header bidding being available, it was now possible to start tracking in real time what is the revenue we are generating on every single user. Combining that with the engagement information. So I was looking in the market, like what can I use? Like Google Analytics, it's nice for engagement and so on a little bit, but I don't have the revenue information.
Right.
And there was other things like Rocksort and so on, really nice for the revenue side, but I was missing the engagement side to it. So in the end, we decided, okay, let's build it in-house, start collecting the data, combining it, understanding the different user segments we have, which users are driving revenue, which ones don't drive revenue, which ones are creating the content that is very important, and we have to be extremely careful that we don't piss them off, basically. Right. And we started using the data then basically to optimize and create different experience for these different user groups.
So that's probably about the time when we met along those lines. And well, certainly your name started coming up in conversations because I think certainly at the early days with header bidding, it was, again, it was very much a community, if you will, that started kind of like coming together and sharing. I mean, I think of people like Emery Downing Hall and others that just sat there and said, I'm trying this. What are you doing? And what are you seeing? And so forth. So I have a feeling that probably helped gravitate you toward this particular space, is that community aspect of it. And it really was what is possible? What could be done? How can you democratize all of this demand and make the most money, and then really kind of track it and so forth? And that was where your name just kept coming up and so forth. And I remember some calls that we did of just sitting there kind of talking about what the future was. And I think you were probably thinking about what is the real opportunity here. And I know we were all early days. And if you think about it, just think about where you started to where things are now. Just the one, there's the sophistication of the level of things that we're able to do. The unfortunate part is that some of the same problems still exist. But there's so much activity that has been drawn into this that just wouldn't have existed hadn't people like yourself hadn't gotten together and started to say, here's a way to kind of build this so that we can do all of those things. So I just remember that, vividly, like our kind of experience, on that front. So again, you're building this for yourself, right? At that point, and the communities that you were helping manage and run. When did it become, wait a second, maybe I should be doing this for others? Or how did that transition happen?
So at the point when we basically started building the analytics and everything around that, or like this engagement tracking in combination with revenue, at that point in time, I didn't know much about this industry. I had worked with a sales house where I put ads on a page. I knew as much as like a publisher that, I don't know, has been working 3 or 4 years with AdSense. I didn't know much more. So I was very much involved in basically the online communities of all the people trying to figure out, how do I do this header bidding? What do I need to do? How do I need to set it up? And so on. And coming from this technical background and also like very hungry for knowledge, and at the same time a combination of having this data available and being able to analyze it and dig into it, it was like a very nice combination of really utilizing the community that basically at this point was like really booming. Many publishers trying to figure things out, how to do this right, how to do this properly. So I got really engaged in there. And of course, I used that opportunity also to increase the knowledge I have, learning from the others, showing them the data, asking them, what else can we do with it? How can we get more value out of it? Now that we have it, what else can I do? And it really, like, very quickly I got the feedback, wow, what is this? Like, I have never seen it. Like, I didn't know this is possible. And a lot of these, like on the ad operation side and so on, like people are always very curious.
I think that's a part of this, right? Of again, the community is one that's very curious, right? We're the problem solvers. It's like every day you wake up and there's another problem to solve, and you show up. I mean, again, people that don't do that don't last in our industry. One of the things I think, though, I hope you give yourself kind of credit for is by the fact that you had your own websites, puts the importance of getting it right such a key component of it, right? And I'll share this openly, right? That when I just started doing events and I wasn't working specifically for a publisher, you lose something in terms of the like investment in it, right? Because I make this joke, right? Of like, yeah, PMPs, wow, those are really tough. That tells you I know nothing, right? But the fact that like by working with a publisher, working and having and saying, I do want to see the revenue grow. It isn't because I built something and I want to see my revenue grow, that I think is probably a really good basis by which to sit there and start to build that out and so forth, and that curiosity and so forth. So it sounds like, okay, so you're starting to get kind of involved in the community. They're starting to see the work that you do and recognize that you do that. I do have to step back. Like when you see a technical challenge, right? Like as you were doing certainly those early days, do you have like a method, a process? Are you I go outside and I sit for a while and it comes to me? Or are you I just work the problem? Because I do both. I find it, depending on what the problem is, but sometimes it's to clear the mind, and other times it's all about just throw myself at the problem. What's your method?
It's usually, it depends on where I am knowledge-wise, but in most cases, I'm really trying to first build up the knowledge and understanding the bigger picture of it. How does it really come into play here, and what are possible side effects? How does it affect other things later down the chain? How are possibly DSPs and advertisers reacting to given changes? What would I need to expect? And then how can I use that to measure basically whatever solution I'm going to try if it's working? So I really like a test-driven approach where I have the option, or we have the option, to validate what we are doing is going in the direction we expected it to go, to validate that our thoughts on how these things are working and how they are playing out are what we think they are.
Right.
Because quite often they are not. I was wrong many, many times and had to rethink, oh, this didn't go as I thought it would go. So what did I miss about how this other stuff is working? I don't know anything about.
So you just iterate, right? You just try, test, learn, grow, and keep adding on to the knowledge base on that. That makes a lot of sense. At some point, though, you go from someone self-interested in the websites that you're running to, I might have a business here. Do you want to talk about kind of the origins of deciding to, for lack of a better word, put a sign up that says I can actually help you with this as well?
Yeah. So with the internal solution, basically, it got to the point where over time it became more and more sophisticated. And at the same time, the interest from the community with whom basically, which I leveraged, or where basically I was a very strong part of, I got a lot of knowledge from. But at the same time, these people also got really interested in this data, in this product. And it started to show there's a pretty strong product market fit here. They really want this. They want to be able to work with this data too, and so on. So I think it took me like 1.5 years, if not 2 years, until I made like the final step. Okay, it's time. And then I sold the publishing business I had in Germany, moved to the Netherlands, incorporated again. Wasn't for tax reasons or anything around that. It was more like I always wanted to move to a different country. And now giving up the publishing business, or basically leaving it a step behind, refocusing, it was basically a good time to make such a move.
So you took a big leap, both by moving as well as kind of starting off the company and things like that. Yeah. That, by the way, and that is a big step, I think, for anyone. There are people who are serial business starters and they have no problem. It seems like, oh, I'm just going to start a new company or whatever. I found that for me, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to do this, right? And you do it, and then of course, you not only have the challenges of whatever the technical issues you were trying to solve, now you have a whole bunch of other things to learn. That's the part I'm honestly still learning. So and again, I do know that at that time you got some traction relatively quickly of people looking to do that, and certainly people, again, in my world, people were mentioning your name if you're ready for that level, if you're ready to really go into this header bidding programmatic world as a publisher, that you were someone to kind of know and to kind of dive into and so forth. Talk maybe about those early days, like, maybe it could be lessons learned, or if you just want to talk about, like, again, scale to take a while to those types of things.
Yeah, so I basically decided all the companies I had before and had built were always fully bootstrapped. I never took any investment. And I took the same approach here again. So I moved to the Netherlands, reincorporated there. And I think for like almost a year, it was just me working on it.
Okay.
It allowed us to become profitable within a few months, of course, because I didn't have high expenses. I would pay myself a minimum, of course. Mm-hmm. But then over time, like, the customer base slowly increased. And I believe after roughly 1 year, I hired the first person.
Okay.
Who would take over the backend architecture of the entire system and make it more scalable. Because at that point, it was like at the inflection point where I was barely able to keep this kind of like data operation, because it was like really like big data primarily running. And it had also to do with the fact that from the beginning, I would build everything on bare metal in-house and not using any kind of cloud providers. Why? Because that is what we did with a Minecraft network. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's not affordable to do it in the cloud. It's just not doable. And from that point onward, one engineer after the other got added. So really like until we got to like 16 or 17 engineers, roughly, it was purely product. And the company grew only through word of mouth. I was myself not even really active. I didn't really travel much. It was like, yes, it was like selling within like the community network and so on, of course, passively. But a lot of it was word of mouth.
So again, hiring engineers, focusing on the product, right, I think is obviously a really strong strategy. Let's take this up a level in terms of as you start hiring people on, values, establishing, again, like once you get to management, right? Once you start to get that, you now have a band, a symphony, if you will, that you're trying to continually get on the same page. Was there anything related to, again, whether it be the community aspect or some of the other things that kind of allowed you to kind of establish, like, what are the values, of assertive yield in Charlotte early days, and how has that evolved?
That's a good question. So
it's a very philosophical question. I could sit there and go like, let's talk about bid requests, and you'd be like, yeah, let's do it. But no, we're going to go philosophical. Again, part of this is because I think this is actually a really important part. Let me just editorialize for a second while you think of your answer, right? Is this really what it's going to come down to, I think, for the next phase for publishing and for our industry, is we're going to have to get rid of some of the bullshit, right? And we're going to have to align with people who have values that align with ours. And I think that that's one of the things that I'm myself wanted to ask more about that question, because I think that there's this aspect of kind of seeing it in action is going to help people choose the right people to work with, because the barrier to entry to our industry is so low that it's very easy for people to come in and promise a lot of things and not deliver. So that's why I'm going with a philosophical question I would normally never ask you, but it's been something top of mind for me. So yes, I'd love to understand how you think about those things when you're building what you build.
So I would say that the kind of like community-driven approach I had before, where a lot of the people that basically help build the system are not getting paid. They are like, they volunteer to basically help and build it up and create something. It's a lot about them being motivated and about feeling like they are adding value to it. And at the same time, them being here and basically heard. So, and I have to say that I was really lucky within the first couple of hires on the engineering side, that I was getting like really, really experienced people that, I don't know, like nowadays it's very difficult to get those people anymore. But back then, when I was working with them very closely, started building a relationship and so on, I was able to bring in really talented people that allowed us to build things really quickly to good level of sophistication. But in general, for me, it's a lot about, how do I put it? I'm very much like a person that listens. In general, I'm introverted. It has changed a bit over the years as I'm more on the road and so on, of course.
I've been rubbing off on you to get you to pull you out. Yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. But in general, like I'm a really good listener, and I really like to listen and figure out like what does a given person want? Where do I want to go? What direction do I want to go? What do I want to focus on working on? So from the start, I would not really create a roadmap. I would not really create, okay, this is like exactly what we're going to build. I would come up with multiple ideas, present them to the people and say, what is most fun to work on? More or less. Not that extreme, but in that direction.
Right.
And I think that made it quite interesting to work within this like very small company for these talented people. And I think I'm still doing that to this day, but no longer to that extent. It's just no longer possible. We have grown to a size where there needs to be a direction, and it can't be just purely chaos.
But you hit on something that we all have to recognize kind of in the industry, again, is one, the amount of talent that's actually available to plug in. That is a challenge. And so it is not easy for someone to come out and try to build what you've built. And publishers have to realize you need partners, because you just can never have enough resources to build on that. And at the same time, there's also a level, I think what makes this work and why so many people are attracted to it is the innovation, right? So in other words, you can give your engineers and go like, I mean, I want to come to it a little bit later, but like when you talk about things like AI, right? I'm sure you sat there and said, guys, do you want to work on more in-depth flooring, or does anyone want to work on machine learning, AI? You kind of know how that conversation would go, right?
Yeah.
So there's this aspect of going, like, continually feeding them with new ideas and so forth. So I think that has worked. So you talked again about kind of the early days and kind of where you are. And again, it really was word of mouth that kind of got you there. Now, like, first of all, how many employees do you have? How many locations? Can you give a feel of where you are today?
I don't know how many locations.
Well, I guess there's a part where remote working is completely, but I retract the question. How many people do you have working?
How many people? It's over 30 people working full time. Yeah, it's really grown to quite a substantial number. And the team itself is really much like completely across the world, more or less. We don't really have people on the Asian side yet.
Yeah.
It's starting.
Get you. Noted. Yeah.
But for me, it was always like, where can I find the talent? And then it doesn't matter really in what country they are, as long as from a legal perspective, it's doable.
Yes.
We have a very distributed team, but I do have the core engineering team basically with me in the Netherlands, especially the people on the back-end side of it, which is helpful to have like the people that are like very critical to the business close by.
Great. I might ask you some more questions about the business, but I do think that there's an aspect that I know that we should really kind of talk about some of the major topics, as well as, capabilities and things that, again, have resonated that you've done to what's kind of next and so forth. So, one thing that I know, I'll say off the bat, maybe you might even be cringe at this, just because, again, there is an aspect where dynamic flooring is something that is attached to your name. You're really kind of either early to that or just really good at that. I think before a lot, really kind of dove into that particular area and so forth. First of all, do you feel like that's an accurate statement, that that's something that you did really well, that really kind of helped drive people to you, or would you say there's something else?
It's a little bit complicated. So
Yeah.
first, it was kind of both. Was one of the early ones doing it, but it was at a point in time where the company was very small, so never got much adoption, and basically primarily also used it for in-house use, not really never productized it at that point in time. And then I kind of have to give a big thank you to Brian O'Kelly here, because he was the one, at this point I was seeing, okay, this is really driving 15-20% lift. But he would then tell me, I would not focus on this. This is not defensible. Google will pull one switch, second price auction is over.
Right.
and at that point in time, it was the right decision, because if I would have invested in that, probably what could have happened to us could have been what happened to many other companies at that point in time.
Right.
It didn't 9 months later, exactly that happened. So that really basically, thanks to him, I started, okay, let's focus on the analytics product, on the intelligence side of things, because this is a very defensible business. It doesn't matter what Google is going to make as a decision. It doesn't matter what Google Analytics is going to do. It doesn't matter what Google Ad Manager is doing. We have integrated so many different solutions in that system that we should be able to survive most things.
So it gives you, right. And so it gives you that kind of holistic view, again, of a picture of your business, which I think that's one of the struggles that most publishers have, is actually understanding their business in terms of what are the opportunities, where are the places to put energy and so forth. So I love the word defensible, first of all, as a business model, but there's a piece of that I bring up when I think about how much our industry has these existential threats and all the things that we talk about. It seems almost not weekly, but almost weekly, of their sustainability. Mentioned Brian O'Kelly, right? Certainly an area he is focused on. We have the MFA conversation. We have cheap reach. We have privacy regulation. We have just data identifiers, privacy sandbox, all of these things, right, that are all circling around us. And it really is hard to concentrate and focus, or necessarily put it all into one picture to say, here's what we should do, or here's what publishers should do, and so forth. What are some of the areas that you are particularly focused on at this point in terms of this is either what we need to build next, or this we need to make sure people understand that we could do this for them? How do we, how are you again approaching the market with what you have to where you want to build?
So there's so much movement in the industry right now in many directions that it's really difficult to even focus on something, I think. And even if we focus on something, there's so much uncertainty that it's a pure gamble right now, from my perspective. Mm-hmm. We do have alternatives if we look at like the cookie going away and so on around that entire topic. But then me being based in Europe, although we operate like a lot here or like to a substantial amount in the US and Canada and so on as well, but like primary focus or like I'm very close to basically the European side of it. There's barely any identify or ID solution that operates in that market. And then there are other things that are happening where basically, for example, if you look at the CMP and opt-in topic on the German market, we have the system where either you're going to give us consent or you pay, which is like, yeah, it's a model. But at the same time, then if you look at like very closely at the GDPR, e-privacy laws and so on, we're not really allowed to sell our data. We are not allowed to basically discriminate based on if someone can afford privacy. That's not a thing. So, and when we have other things happening, big ones like the telecommunication companies teaming up, starting to create their own identity solution. But then they have to get the user to opt into that. How do they opt in? They haven't figured that out yet, but I'm guessing like one good option would be to give a discount on your internet service provider bill or give more data volume. But we are back to the discrimination part of it. Selling your data in order to get like, something you might otherwise not be able to afford.
Yeah.
So for me, there's still such big question marks. There's a lot of things and concept that could work really, really well. But I'm skeptical as to what basically in the end and the courts will be decided is okay and is not okay. But at the same time, I'm optimistic because the government and the European Union and so on, they are not interested in completely basically hurting the entire economy. Because if addressability is being hurt, it's not only affecting the advertising space, it's affecting pretty much everything.
Right. Yeah, right. I mean, again, if the some of the people know who I'm referring to. They wrote an article that advertising is obsolete, and I wanted to basically. My response was, whatever business you go into, don't advertise, and I will go in the same business and I'll advertise. And you could be better than me, but I'll win. Right? Advertising works. We just have to find the right lines, right? And I think that's to your point, the big question is, but privacy makes a lot of sense too. I want privacy, right? But there's an aspect of what is the relationship. So would you say then, in terms of, as a lot of these things are to be determined, right? Some of it is to focus on what you have today and kind of maximizing that. And I mentioned AI and so forth. I think that's an area that you've really put some effort into to build that out and do some things that, again, I think you were early to it, as well as, I mean, maybe doing some things that others are not. Do you want to expand about how, and again, I'm using AI. I know, like, I myself know when AI is not the right term, but it's just the easiest way to say it. So, but yes, please.
I think AI is a totally fine word. It's like, if you look it up, it's primarily more like the category, and then you have the different definitions underneath. So
we work in an industry where someone will try to shame you and go like, we're really talking about machine learning at this point. And you're like, okay, fine. So sometimes I'm sensitive to sometimes being called out on that type of thing. But yes, AI. So talk about what that means for Assertive Yield. So
for us, it was kind of, we created this very big data product, basically, sitting on so much data. And a lot of publishers don't have the time to actually really dig into it and make use of it. There are many publishers that are very technical, very data-driven, for whom this is basically like, this is like a must, and they really get value out of it. But there are even more publishers that don't have those resources and don't have that time. So the logical next step for us was, okay, we need to harvest some of this data in a way where we can automatically apply optimizations and help drive the publisher more value.
So it really is okay, and I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Because again, a lot of companies can get you data, but then acting on it or getting it to insightful and whatever. And so what you're saying is, again, we've got the data. Now what we've been doing is just kind of moving it so it actually has the action associated with it. And again, publishers are a wild group in terms of some of them want their hands on every single detail, and others want a check every month coming from various sources or whatever. And so I got a feeling that there's some aspect of that kind of plays into that.
Yeah, it's also when we look at like the time when the company started, it was like beginning of 2019. It didn't take long until we were within the COVID period. And with all of the uncertainties within that period, the willingness to basically spend money to buy a solution that is seen as a cost factor. Because like in analytics, a data product is purely seen as a cost factor because there is no immediately measurable return of it. The team has to use it and leverage it, but we can't put like a number on it. It's going to make you this amount of revenue. And we are not paying the publisher is paying us. So that makes it very difficult to sell during those times. Even if the publisher and the people working it really want it and have ideas on how they're going to use it and see the value within it and can make calculations, the CFO of that company likely doesn't understand. Doesn't have that level of depth. Yeah. So during those times, it's pretty much like, selling a product like this is very, very difficult. But at the same time, already like in the time before, we had like the experience where many companies were like interested in the product, but we needed to also deliver like a basically guaranteed uplift too, in order to make it like a good choice. Mm-hmm. And that is where we tapped into, okay, let's re-tackle the flooring aspect of things. Now we are in the first price auction. Let's see if we can figure out if we can't make it work with that one as well. It's also when we started to do like traffic shaping for publishers. Back then, traffic shaping on the publisher side was a word we had never heard of. So we actually call it like bid request reduction system or bid request optimization system. As well as some other things like supply shaping and so on to optimize between direct and open auction demand and squeeze out more incremental revenue in the middle. So all of these things basically we worked on, and it really took over a year to get the flooring system to work reliably within the first price auction. There are so many nuances to it, and especially when a publisher has direct campaigns running, it makes it really difficult to accurately measure and make sure it is driving uplift.
Right, and so, right, I think that there's a part of that, right, of just the complexity that has continued to grow is at the point now where you need AI. You need, again, we go back all the way to the early header bidding days. There's a little bit of that of going, it's probably best that was done manually, if you will, because then you learn.
Yeah.
And then you learn and go like, that was a lot of effort to go from $1.32 to $1.35. Maybe my time would be better spent elsewhere, right? And you work through all of those things, right, with your hands in it. And then you're able to sit there and say, with an AI system here to apply that. But what I love to hear, right, is just again, taking that from analytics to action. And the fact is that all those analytics, you couldn't, at this point, I think through all the identifiers to all the environments to everything else that's, and the supply path optimization, all those particular pieces. I think we're at a point now where I'm sure there are a couple of people who could be mad at me for saying it, that because they are probably doing this all manually, but it's a little bit of time to let the machines do their piece and drive that particular thing. Now, go ahead, please. I don't know if you...
I think like with flooring, the initially difficult part is really to identify how are we going to measure success.
Right.
Of course, we can say, okay, like revenue goes up per, 1,000 visits, for example, or because we need to consider unfilled rate, we need to consider pages that go completely empty. Any kind of opportunity is lost. But even that is not that easy oftentimes, because you have revenue shifting from one pocket to another one, going from ad exchange to pre-bid, going from pre-bid to ad exchange, going to Amazon, and you have all of these changes happening that makes that measurement difficult. But once there's a good base established to measure it, that is then also the point where now we can reliably, with manual optimizations, measure if it is working. And then the second step of that is applying automation to it to automatically make those improvements. Now, we had already built a system that is predicting basically what partners will be bidding for another optimization. Because we wanted already, before we built the flooring solution, the second version of it for the first price auction, we already had the need to understand what is the revenue in real time from all of the partners, including the ones that don't provide it in real time. So we already had built a very sophisticated system that is able to predict basically the final closing price relatively accurately. And this is then was basically the foundation of the first price flooring system. So we got so accurate with that system that we took it and reapplied it to the flooring mechanism, using also the learnings from the manual floor price optimization, building it on top of it, and building a system that is now able to, on one end, control, basically see what is happening with like our default manual strategy or no strategy at all, exploring different strategies and how they are performing for different device types, countries, and so on. And then picking the strategies that perform the best and going with those as long as they are working well. But then also understanding, oh, it's the end of a month. We completely have to change our strategy because now all of the ad budget that wasn't spent for this month is going into the market. The rates are going through the roof. Or at the beginning of a month, everything dropping down, beginning of the year dropping down. So we have to really adjust very quickly. And this is also the part where the automatic flooring is capable of handling that if it is very sophisticated and well prepared to understand these quick shifts within the market.
I think that quick shifts is such an important part that publishers need to develop that skill set, because again, what it comes down to is opportunities arise very quickly and the entire market will move toward those opportunities. If you could be at the beginning of that, you obviously reap more of the rewards. Again, this is just basic dynamics of auctions and economies and so forth. But within our own little economy, right, within our own little ecosystem, I think that that's one of the things that we need to see publishers have the tools, right? So they need that data that you talked about, and then they need to be able to then act on that quickly to be able to really kind of take advantage. Because I think it's going to come down to when the opportunity arises, are you ready to get that money now? And we know the cycles of things going up and down and quarters and all those pieces. But I have a feeling, especially as certainly third-party cookies to other things, there's going to be a need to be able to go, wow, someone's testing spend. I want that test spend, right? I mean, it really comes down to it. If someone starts to put money out in the marketplace, you want to be in position to get that. And that takes superior analytics to action in a very quick pace. And I think that's going to be really the future of programmatic trading for publishers kind of going forward.
I think there are two sides of it. On one side, the advertising budget is not going to change only because publishers are acting fast on it.
Right. The number doesn't change.
Yeah.
It's your percentage of, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So step by step, of course, there's more sophistication being built to capture more of that market as competition is increasing and more systems are trying to basically get more of that cake, which makes it more and more difficult for publishers that want to run and keep running things internally to stay up to date with it, to stay on the edge where they can get that big chunk of the cake they should have.
Right.
Because we have many companies within the market where we can say, okay, I'm going to give my inventory to a sophisticated sales house. Very good and valid option. But then for a very big brand publisher, it doesn't really make sense because they have reasons to keep that stuff in-house.
Right.
But at the same time, they don't have a 20, 30 people engineering team that understands the industry, that understands how the industry is changing, where it is going, and so on, and has the time to really explore and figure out what is working.
So I feel like what you just hit on, because I want to talk as we get close to wrapping up here, is if I were to sit there and ask you like some advice for publishers, I think you just identified why that's kind of a difficult question to ask, because you're going like, we talking about big publishers with brands, or are we talking about programmatic and so forth? What is for you a good, and I'm saying this, I'm not looking at it, just like trying to think through of like what the right kind of publisher is for Assertive Yield. Like, in other words, when you have that kind of conversation and you're like, what are some of the things that you look for? And what I'm trying to do is that's a proxy for asking for what should they be doing? What is it that you see someone's trying to do that goes, I think we can help. I think we can grow your business.
For us, as we have basically advanced a lot from basically the products and the stuff we do, and really got a lot of experience from daily working with all of this data, we really got to the point where product-wise, we sit on a stack that is competitive, if not in some parts more advanced than what the biggest sales houses have, technology-wise, and that usually is quite more advanced than what the biggest publishers have in certain areas, not everywhere, of course. So from our perspective, and we have a quite, like from my perspective myself, is like, I don't want to get involved on the demand side at all. I don't want to create any bias for us to be shifting in one or another direction demand-wise. And I really want to help publishers keep running their operations efficiently in-house as they wanted to, the big ones, but do it so efficiently that they are not being left behind by not being able to keep up on the technology side with it. So from my perspective, it's really helping these publishers be, on one side, as sustainable as they can be, as efficient as they can be, and to be on the cutting edge of what right now is possible to do. But also giving the ability to really adapt and make changes quickly to the ever-changing market, and educating those publishers as to, okay, these 5 identity solutions, you can use them, but they're not going to make a difference for today. These, they're going to make a difference for you. This is what we see with other publishers. You're going to fall in this range. They are roughly similar. You can expect like a 5 or 10%, 15% lift. Saving a lot of time basically evaluating different solutions and sharing already perspectives as what is reasonably possible compared to all the different sales pitches where we have no idea what can we expect. So it's really basically about keeping things internal, but providing the tools to run it efficiently and be able to stay up to date with the market as it's changing, as it's evolving, and being really able to stay independent in that field.
And I love that last word of independent, right? Because I think that this is the line that publishers have to figure out, which is to control their own destiny, but you can't control your own destiny alone. You need partners, you need technology, you need platforms on which to do things, because you can't just reinvent everything, right? Again, I know there are a lot of publishers that are developing their own technology in certain areas about things like brand safety and other data and other areas, and I applaud that. I think that that's really, really interesting. But there's an aspect of the dynamics of the open marketplace that I kind of, again, someone could call me out and tell me that I'm wrong for putting them into bed, but I look at that and sit there and go like, that's not to me where I need partnerships on that. I'm not going to look at page 1 of an AI book and go, okay, time for me to learn. You know, it kind of brings it back to the beginning, right? Of kind of your entrepreneurial spirit, the community aspect of this, and that, oh, here's a problem, I'm going to go solve that. And I think that there's a piece of that we want that energy to remain in the industry. I think this is, again, where we're kind of at our best, is that we're always playing the new game, what's the next line, and so forth. But I think that line changes, right? This is where someone that's been at this as long as I have, I'm not going to go and do that anymore at a certain level, right? But there's this aspect of going, but that's okay, because no one has figured out, you mentioned all the big question marks, and there is no one way to go through all of that. And so we're going to all have to talk as a community and work and be entrepreneurial, and we're going to have to kind of work through those things.
Yeah, I think there's really no answer in the market yet as to And at the same time, I think it's really important that publishers are going in different directions. It's impossible for a publisher really much to go in all directions, besides maybe a few of the top ones. But then keeping things open to be able to quickly pivot and not overexpand in most directions. Some of them will go in a direction that in the end pays off. Some of them will go in one that unfortunately won't pay off. But I think it's really important to be able to remain at a point where then really quickly we can pivot in a different direction and follow what is working. Because right now, from what we are seeing, it's a lot of bets being made and we don't know which ones will be paying off. Of course, we can go all direct. We can capture a lot of email addresses and so on, and we can probably in the end still use them. There are question marks in Europe, but here probably here in the US it will be all fine.
For now.
For now. For now, yeah. So from my perspective, it's just like so many things are changing right now in the market and there's so much uncertainty, it's really good to be agnostic and really good to be able to move and adopt quickly, as well as having access to information to understand as to where's the market going, what is working, what is not working, and then quickly being able to pivot in that direction that is working, that is driving the value. And at the same time, also understanding what is it that we can build and that we can focus on that is unique, that is not something that is basically common, standard in the industry. So for example, when internally we want to build a new product, I always do research and I want to make sure that if what we are building is not something that already exists. There's a high risk with that, of course, but if it works out, there's also a good reward. Of course, there are cases where something is so critical to the business that it's just not possible to outsource it, but every single time we can, it makes no sense to invest in something that is already built, that is already working, that is stable, sophisticated on the market. It makes a lot more sense to focus on the things where we can get to the next level, do something that sets us apart from basically
and
the market.
work with those point solutions, right? So in other words, again, making that simpler to work with many of the best in class technologies versus picking one and losing somewhere else, kind of having that umbrella that allows you to work with all of those. And then of course, all that built off data and analytics that gives you a picture that new idea was a good idea.
On top of that, of course, it's also been, we are in this industry where a lot of tricks are being played.
Yes.
Everyone knows that. And the boundaries are being pushed every single day. Sometimes they're being pushed too far, sometimes they are able to remain at the edge. So I think like another part that is kind of like quite important is that the people that are pushing the boundaries tend to be new companies within the industry. Some go too far, some stay within the line, and then also basically the ones that have the resources to really like, we want to try every single way we can go. Mm-hmm. Let's figure out up to which point we can push it. And I think that for a lot of people, it is very difficult to understand when are we going too far, when are we remaining within what is possible, and when are we being too easy, too good, and completely miss out. So I think that's also really like a part which I like, is that I can communicate with so many different publishers, talk about things, and can just share them. 60% of your friendly competitors or basically partners in the market are already doing it. It's probably fine to do it, but I would not go above this line.
Right.
And at the same time saying, this is going to explode earlier or later. Try to think of something different.
I have more questions for you, but I have to be very conscious of our time and things like that. One thing I was going to mention is that you just came out with a report. And again, that is something that you've done over time of giving out those reports. And I do think that they give a really good picture. So to your point about sharing and going, here's the line, here's too far, and those types of things as to where those opportunities are, I hope encourage you to continue to kind of produce that kind of content. Last most important question I could ask you. Those school teachers that you had, that obviously if you had a problem and you said you didn't enjoy school, are those school teachers, are they proud of you? Are they aware of the success that you've had?
I don't know, but honestly speaking, I don't think it had anything to do with the school teachers.
So, all right, I may have framed that wrong. I may have framed that incorrectly. But anyway, Nils, I'm so thankful to actually kind of catch up with you. And again, this is something where you and I catch up from here to there, obviously at the various conferences and so forth, but to actually have a chance to kind of talk and learn these things about this and your vision is really kind of helpful and stuff like that. And thank you for joining us on BeelerCast. We look forward to doing the next one and stuff like that. And we will definitely be working together on some other things coming up. So looking forward to it.
Thank you very much, Beeler.